Number 7. Chris Watts. On August 13, 2018, 34-year-old Shanann Watts went missing along with their 2 children in Frederick, Colorado. Her disappearance was reported by her friend Nicole Atkinson, who noted that Shanann, who was pregnant at the time, didn't attend her regular doctor's appointment. Her husband, Chris Watts, was at work during the time she disappeared. The police arrived for a wellness check and Chris let them search for whatever they wanted. He seemed pretty annoyed by the whole situation instead of being worried his family had vanished. He would later go on to say he was having marital problems and that she may have just gone off to get some space. He gave his own version of what happened between the two, although his story changed multiple times over the coming days. The FBI and their Colorado affiliate formally started investigating the matter. While looking, they found out Watts had been ignoring Shanann for a while in their relationship. The two were rarely ever intimate, and they also found out he was having an affair, which is a big red flag. Chris quickly became a suspect in the case, and eventually, on August 15th, around 2 days after the disappearance, he failed a polygraph test and was arrested shortly after. By now, he wasn't just a suspect in the case, but the prime one. All the prosecution needed was a confession, and they got exactly that when Chris told them he'd tell the truth if his father heard it first. Eventually, on August 21st, 2018, the police arranged a meeting between Chris and his father. They told the dad to press Chris into confessing, and it was a success. Chris revealed with apathy that he murdered Shanann and his 2 children and dismembered them, burying them in the Anadarko petroleum site in an oil tanker. Shortly after, Chris was charged with murder, and the bodies of his victims were discovered exactly where he said they were. On November 6, 2018, Chris Watts was given 5 life sentences for 1 count of murder, 2 counts of murdering a child, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. How a father and husband could murder his whole family with little guilt, we'll never understand. Number 6. Babis Agnostopoulos. In May of 2021, a British woman named Caroline Crouch was found dead in a home in Glika, near Greece. Caroline was married to Babis Agnostopoulos, a Greek man who was 13 years older than her. Babis reported around 3 armed burglars had broken into their house that day, and during the incident, Caroline was tragically killed. He said the men killed their dog first, and then they tied him to a chair. He added that they forced him and his 11-month-old child to watch Caroline get strangled to death before they robbed the house. Babis told the police he was able to reach them by dialing the emergency number with his nose, but once the police carried out an investigation of the murder, they found phone activity on Babis's phone during the time he was supposed to be tied up. The timeline also seemed off, since Caroline was moving around and had low stress levels, according to her smartwatch, when she should have been dead. After figuring this out, police called Babis over to Athens for further questioning, and as soon as he arrived, they placed him under arrest as the prime suspect. They interrogated him for 8 grueling hours, and while the exact details of what happened during the interrogation are unknown, they managed to get a confession. By June 22nd, Babis had spent over a month behind bars and was set to give his testimony in court. He was escorted by armed guards and wore a bulletproof vest when arriving at the courthouse, all while avoiding protesters outside the courthouse as well. He confessed to all of the crimes, including strangling and murdering his wife. He revealed that he had gotten into a heated argument with Caroline, which led to the killing. The robbery story was completely made up, and he claimed the murder wasn't premeditated. He had only killed her in, quote, the heat of the moment, although that still doesn't explain why he hanged their 8-month-old dog. With all the evidence and a confession, Babis has been charged with murder, animal abuse, and child endangerment, among other minor charges. If he's convicted of all of these, as he's expected to be, he will be sentenced to life imprisonment. Hopefully, a life behind bars will be enough to keep such a sick man at bay. Do you think Babis got what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Michael Peterson. On December 9th, 2001, a 58-year-old man from North Carolina named Michael Peterson called 911 and told them that his wife, 48-year-old Kathleen Peterson, fell down the stairs. He said she had been drunk before the fall, and by the time emergency services arrived, she was already dead. While the incident was initially treated as an accidental death, the police were suspicious of Michael from the very beginning. Autopsy results showed that Kathleen suffered a number of injuries from the fall, but in order to die, she would have had to lie there unattended for over 2 hours. Considering the incident happened in their home, it would have been nearly impossible for Michael not to have noticed and saved her life before she died. On top of that, investigators hired a medical examiner named Deborah Radish, who further examined Kathleen's body. Numerous lacerations were found on Kathleen's scalp caused by repeated blows from some kind of weapon, not by a fall, and she believed it to be the true cause of Kathleen's death. On December 20th, Michael was indicted by the Durham County Grand Jury for first-degree murder charges. He had already hired a defense attorney long before being indicted, and he surrendered to the Durham police not long after. Throughout the trial, Michael maintained his innocence. It was up to the prosecution to prove the death wasn't accidental, and that Michael had been behind the whole incident. On April 14, 2003, Kathleen's body was exhumed from her grave, and further investigation showed she died from blunt force trauma to the head. Around the same time, the prosecution discovered Michael had an ex-girlfriend during the 1980s in Graufhausen, Germany, named Elizabeth Ratliff. She had also died in the same exact way, with Michael finding her body at the bottom of a staircase. At that point, the prosecution felt they had everything they needed, and on October 10, 2003, the verdict was announced. Michael was sentenced to life in prison for the first-degree murder of his wife, Kathleen Peterson. Number 4. Jamila Mbarak. On November 3, 2004, Anthony Ashley Cooper, a British royal and the 10th Earl of Shaftesbury, disappeared without a trace in France. He arrived in the city of Nice to have a meeting with his estranged wife Jamila Mbarak, but as he was about to leave, he vanished. Soon after, he was reported missing by his girlfriend, Orche, around 12 days later in London, and on November 22nd, an official inquiry was opened in Nice. Initially, fingers were pointed at Russian or African mobsters who might have tried to steal the Earl's wealth, and many suspected he could have been kidnapped. But after a month, the case was treated as a murder since no trace of the Earl had been found. The one person who was barely even questioned during the ordeal was Jamila Mbarak, the estranged wife. Around February 2005, Jamila suffered a mental breakdown and had to be admitted to a mental institute. It was there that Jamila confessed to her involvement in her husband's murder. When the police were called, she told them her brother had gotten into a fight with the Earl, and that he ended up killing him during the argument. She was arrested shortly after on February 25th, and her brother was arrested one day later in Germany. She told police that her brother had dumped Anthony's body into the trunk of a BMW and buried it at an unknown location. The body was eventually discovered in 2005. During the trial, the prosecution discovered that a week before the incident, Jamila transferred over £150,000, or just over $203,000 into her brother's bank account. They tried to argue this was some sort of payment for a, quote, hit on the Earl of Shaftesbury. Eventually, the prosecution got their hands on a secretly recorded phone conversation between Jamila and her sister Naima. The call showed Jamila discussing the money she would pay her brother and how she put all the blame on him. On May 25, 2007, Jamila and her brother were sentenced to 25 years in prison each. Who knows what other dark secrets the royals have? Number 3. Amy Archer-Gilligan. Amy Archer-Gilligan owned one of America's first nursing homes, and she also happened to be a serial killer. From 1907 to 1917, she owned the Archer Home for the Elderly and Infirm, where she lived with many tenants. She started the home with her first husband, James Archer. James died of natural causes in 1910, but just a few weeks before he died, Amy took out an insurance policy on him, which doesn't sound suspicious at all. She later married Michael in 1913, who died 3 months later due to severe indigestion, but not before he left everything he owned to Amy in his will. Amy was now extremely wealthy and the sole owner of the nursing home. Between 1911 and 1916, 48 residents at Archer Home died. Even some of the healthy patients, including Franklin R. Andrews, who seemed fine a day before his death, but somehow came down with a case of gastric ulcers. After Andrews' death, his relatives decided to do some digging. Apparently, Andrews loaned some money to Amy shortly before his death. This also happened with many other residents who died not long after loaning Amy money. It was now becoming clear Amy was killing her residents, and her weapon of choice? Arsenic. She was caught practically red-handed during a police investigation while sending residents to buy arsenic for her. In preparation for the trial, 5 bodies of her alleged victims were exhumed, and all of them had died of similar circumstances. Amy was eventually sentenced to death for murder, but her execution was later overturned, and she was sent to the Connecticut Hospital for the Insane instead, where she lived until her own death in 1962. Number 2. Evelyn Dick. Evelyn Dick was a Canadian woman from Hamilton, Ontario, who didn't have the best relationship with her husband, John Dick. In March of 1956, John went missing until a group of 5 children came across a dismembered human torso just sitting in the middle of a field. It was later revealed to be John's. Evelyn was arrested for the disappearance, but when the trial happened, she was acquitted and let go. Just as she was about to walk free, though without a care in the world, another body was found in her home. Only this time, it was her son's. The body was found inside of a suitcase in the attic, and she was once again arrested and, this time, thankfully, convicted for the murder of her son. She was sentenced to life in prison but only served 11 years before her parole in 1958. In 1985, now 65 years old, Evelyn was officially pardoned and given a brand new identity. What happened to her since then remains unknown, and she still might be alive today, living among us all as a free woman with a dark secret. It's strange to think that someone who brutally took the lives of 2 people so close to her could get off with such a tame punishment. Number 1. Matt Baker. On April 8, 2006, Matt Baker, a minister at Crossroads Baptist Church in Waco, Texas, called 911 after he discovered the body of his wife Carrie when he got home from work. When paramedics arrived, they were unable to revive her. The death was initially ruled as a suicide by overdose. Carrie became depressed after the death of their daughter 7 years before, and considering Carrie's death took place around the anniversary of her daughter's death, it made sense that Carrie chose to end her life right there and then. But something still seemed off. Carrie's parents weren't willing to accept that their daughter ended her life. Carrie's mother, Linda, accused the husband Matt of hitting on young women behind Carrie's back. On top of this, Linda had added Matt and Carrie's cell phone number to her phone plan, and it was revealed after Carrie's death that Matt kept making calls to her phone for weeks. An investigation showed Matt had given Carrie's cell phone to a woman named Vanessa who went to the same church. The investigation into Carrie's death was reopened with this new discovery, although when her body was exhumed, the cause of death still remained unclear. Prosecutors now believe Baker drugged his wife instead of her committing suicide. He could have done this to hide his relationship with Vanessa. During the trial, the prosecution ended up calling Vanessa to testify. Before the trial, Vanessa denied even knowing Baker personally, but during questioning, she confessed to everything. She stated that they started their affair in 2005, and around 2006, Baker planned to divorce his wife Carrie. She then revealed Matt had planned to drug his wife by giving her a powerful Ambien dose, saying it would enhance her sexual performance. She said that Baker revealed he waited for Carrie to sleep before suffocating her with a pillow. In January of 2010, Matt was found guilty of murdering his wife Carrie Baker and was sentenced to 65 years in prison. Not exactly the typical behavior for a minister. Thanks for watching. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Do you know any others? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like these. See you next time on The Bad Badger.